But go ahead and grab your Bibles. We're going to just jump right into this series. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this Christmas series from the book of Matthew. And so go ahead and turn there with me. If you know a little bit about the Bible, you know that there's 4 Gospels, right? Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, and those first 4 books are called the Gospels. And those Gospels are about the life, ministry, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, our Savior, whom we're worshiping, whom we're celebrating His birth at Christmas time. And I did get new glasses for those of you that are asking. Because the last one, just as a side note, I had like literally over 5 people tell me I look like a serial killer with those old glasses on. So I got some new glasses on Black Friday. So anyway, I just had to adjust them there. So I'm trying to get used to them. But in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew. Now, if you know the other Gospels, you will not find the Christmas story in a few of them, which is kind of interesting. And each of the Gospels is a little bit different, and they all tell the same story of Jesus, but maybe from a little bit of a different perspective, if you know what I mean. Like, they highlight a little bit of the story a little bit differently. They tell the same story. They get the main facts the same. But it's kind of like if me and Monty and Chuck went to a Diamondbacks game, let's say. And we were all at the game, and you asked us how the game was, and we all said, well, the game was 7-2, and, you know, it was the Diamondbacks playing the Cubs or whatever. Like, we would get the facts straight. But if you were to ask us, like, what the highlights of the game were, we might each have a different perspective, right? Like, if you ask me, I might say, well, there was a grand slam, right, in the bottom of the 5th, and there's bases loaded. This dude, like, pulled it hard to right field, and it was so cool, and I want to highlight that. Like, that was what really stood out to me. But Monty's maybe not really a baseball player, and so what he saw was this big, huge policeman, right, coming down the stairs, and he's walking down the stairs, and he trips and falls, right? And he's, like, really concerned for the policeman, and so when you ask him about the highlights, like, I wasn't even watching that, right? He's watching that, and Chuck's highlight is maybe, you know, the guy that's running around selling the popcorn and the peanuts and the beer or whatever. That policeman fell and knocked that dude over, right? And so that guy spills all of his drinks on this lady, and she's screaming and yelling. There's just details that each of us might relay that are just kind of unique to our own personalities or what we were watching at the time. And each of the Gospels is kind of like that each writer has his own kind of twist on the story. They tell the same story, but with a little bit of a flavor of their own. And we're going to see as these Gospels break down that neither Mark nor John even talk about the birth of Jesus. So they jump right into the ministry already. Jesus has already grown. They jump right into John the Baptist out in the desert, and he's doing these things. And he's announcing that Jesus is coming. So you can't read the Christmas story in Mark or John. So you really only have 2 options. You have Matthew and you have Luke. Well, Luke is a doctor, okay? And remember, all 4 of these accounts are eyewitness accounts. Luke gets his information from Peter, who was there, and he's very detailed. And so he starts his story with the birth announcement of John the Baptist and the birth, which was a miracle, the birth announcement of Jesus. He gets into all the nitty-gritty details of how Jesus was born and his predecessors and his family and all that. And so we're not going to start there. Where we're going to start is in the book of Matthew. And the reason we're going to start in the book of Matthew is because Matthew starts the Christmas story from what we consider, both Bob and I consider this to be kind of a crazy way to start a story. So turn there with me to the book of Matthew, chapter 1. We're going to start and read, and we're going to read something that probably a lot of you, if you're like me, would skip, right? You would skip this because if you've got your Bible, turn there with to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. It says this, and Matthew starts the Christmas story with a genealogy, okay? With a genealogy. And here's what it says. It says, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. It says, this is the record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Now, let me ask you, why in the world, right? Why in the world? If you're someone that's like me, and you can be honest, do any of you, when you see those genealogies, you're just like, all right, whoop, right past them, right? You come to a genealogy in the Bible, and you're like, oh, why is this here? You read the first few names, and you're like, oh, I'm skipping to the end, right? Like, why in the world would Matthew, as a writer, begin the Christmas story with this genealogy, which is so boring, right? As a writer, you're trained to start a story with a wow factor, right? Grab the reader immediately, get their attention, make them want to continue to read. And Matthew starts with a genealogy, which is kind of crazy. It's like, come on, Matthew, bro, really? Are you kidding me? But actually, Matthew had a very specific purpose in mind when he shared this genealogy, because Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience. He was writing to his brother, his countrymen, people that this genealogy was going to set the stage of whether they were going to read the rest of this or not. Okay? For the Jew, your ancestry, your connection to the past, to your forefathers, to Israel, was absolutely imperative. And if you look at that verse there, it says, this is the record of the ancestors of Jesus, what does he share the word? The Messiah. And so when a Jew would have read that word, the Messiah, he knows, okay, he's talking about Jesus being the Messiah. That means that he's got to have a certain family tree. And so before I go any further, you better explain to me Jesus' family tree, his ancestors, the people that had come before him. And for all Jews, kind of the heroes of the faith were Abraham and David. Okay? And that's what Matthew starts out with here. He tells them that Jesus is the Messiah. He answers this question immediately, and then he says, listen, he's an ancestor of David. He's one of David's sons. You remember those texts that say it would be one of David's kin would be on the throne. That's the Messiah. And so for Jews to read this story, they're figuring out if this is even a story worth reading or not. Okay? They're saying, is this even worth my time to read this letter that Matthew has written? Is it even a story? Now, what's interesting to me is that Matthew includes in this genealogy some pretty sketchy people, okay? Some people that if you and I were to write a genealogy of Jesus, we would not include these people in it. And in fact, what he does, he goes out of the way to include people in this genealogy that have no business being there. He adds them in parentheses and says, don't forget about this person who's connected to the story. And if, as we look at it, you're going to say, why would you do that, right? It's like bringing up your crazy uncle that's in prison for murdering 50 people. You're like, remember him? It's like, why would you bring that guy up when you're trying to establish that Jesus is the Messiah? And he does this for a very specific purpose. Now, what's interesting to me is that Matthew does something here that none of the other ancient writers would have done. If you do a little bit of research, you find out that ancient history books that were written, scrolls, papyruses, all these things that were written, they were written by men that were hired by kings and military generals to record their victories and their lives. Now remember, it's not like today where you can just get a laptop and start writing out, right? It was extremely expensive to write a history book. And it's not like there were lots of books and paper was expensive. And it was an extremely expensive process to record history. It was all oral history. The only people that could really afford this were very wealthy people or kings or military generals. And so what they do is they hire someone like Donna. They say, Donna, I want you to write out this history for me. And because they're paying so much money, what do they want in that history? They want all the good stuff, right? So they're going to begin to tell Donna, this is how I got the kingdom. This is how I got the throne. But I'm going to leave out that I had to kill 3,000 people to get it, right? I'm going to leave out that my son is a crazy idiot. I'm not going to talk about that son, but I will talk about my firstborn son that's really good, right? Which most firstborn sons are. Most firstborn kids are way better than the rest of them, right? Because I'm a firstborn, right? It's just how it is. So you talk about that firstborn kid, right? But leave out the middle kid, right? But you have the ability to do that when you're paying someone to write this history. And you tell them, hey, don't forget, write about how we had all these victories, but don't talk about our defeats. And so as you look at ancient history books, you're really looking at a very specifically designed, pointed, prejudiced way of looking at what actually happened. But Matthew didn't do that. And this is what's interesting about the Bible. Throughout the whole Bible, this ancient document goes way far away from what normal ancient documents were like. Okay? Because it was, I'm going to share a 4-letter word with you right now. Because it was real. The Bible talked about real things. It didn't make things up. The Bible writers did not only share the good stuff. They shared the horrible stuff as well. They talked about the people who made horrible mistakes, about all of the chaos and all of that. And ancient documents normally do not talk about that kind of thing. This is what's so unique and special about the Bible. And Matthew puts people in this genealogy that he absolutely did not need to. And so what we're going to do in this series is look at some of those people that he puts in parentheses. And he puts some sketchy people in this genealogy. And we're going to look at some of their stories. In fact, he includes women. And I'm not trying to dime any of you women out or say you're less than, but there was no reason for these women to be in there. He includes some of these women, and some of the women aren't even Jewish. And some of the women have a really bad reputation, but he decides to just throw them in there and kind of pause there for a second and say, don't forget about where we've come from. And so this is what we're going to continuing in that talk. And so let me show you what we're talking about. Continuing, Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. We already looked at 1 and 2. Here's verse 3. Excuse me. Judah, so just continuing on. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, who was the mother of Tamar. How many of you remember the story of Tamar? A few of you church people, okay? Some of you have no idea about the story of Judah and Tamar. It is an R-rated story, okay? And we're going to talk about it next week. We're going to talk about this story next week. Pastor Bob's, right? This is the one that you're doing next week. This is a crazy, creepy, I don't want to give it away. Like it is a crazy story. Like, why would Matthew, she's in parentheses. Why say that? Why add her there? It doesn't make any sense to me. Continuing. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Solomon. In verse 5, Solomon was the father of Boaz. Here comes another parentheses, whose mother was Rahab. How many of you have heard of Rahab before? Okay. She has a nickname, doesn't she? Rahab the what? Prostitute. Like, why is he including her in this? Like, it doesn't really make any sense to me. And what's interesting, like, this is what's funny to me. We're going to, like, you and I, if you're a believer in Jesus, you're going to be in heaven someday. You're going to be strolling along, and you're going to see Rahab, and you go, oh, you're Rahab the lady in the Old Testament, right? Because you don't want to call her what she is or was. And Matthew includes her in this thing. It's just crazy to me. Come on, Matthew. It's nuts. Boaz, let's continue. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Have you heard of that one? Heard of her? Right? Some of you have. Well, that's a good story. But Ruth wasn't Jewish. This is nuts that he would continue to include these people. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. We're there finally. We're to David. Yes. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. He's got to throw Uriah in there? Are you kidding me? She was Uriah's wife until David killed him. Really? Like, why in the world would, and these are parentheses things. They had no business being in there. These women had no business being in this genealogy. And I'm not saying because you aren't worth it or whatever. Like, there was literally no reason, right? He could have so easily skipped it all and said, not today. Not like there's all the other moms aren't in there. Why would he pause there? If you know the story of David and Bathsheba, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Pretty much everyone in the Western culture probably knows that, even if you hadn't gone to church much. David should be at war. He's king. His men are off to battle. He's outside. He sees some hot chick. He's like, ooh, bring her to me, right? The servants bring him the lady. They sleep together. She has a baby. He tries to bring her husband back from the battle to try to make him sleep with her so they can cover it up. He doesn't. He ends up killing the guy. The guy's pretty much one of his best friends. This is like a soap opera on steroids. It's crazy. This is our King David that we say it was a man after God's own heart. Why in the world would Matthew include this kind of story? That's the question I want to ask you. We always ask you a question. Why would Matthew include all of these sketchy people and stories in this genealogy? Why do you think he would include all of this chaos? What's that? To bring legitimacy? Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead. To show that they were fallible just like we are? Absolutely. Who else? Yeah, I see one in the back. Rob. That Rob said, we're sketchy people too, and God includes us. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So even though the Jews were God's chosen people, he includes some of these Gentiles to show us that we're still part of God's redemptive plan for the world. Yeah, so just to, from my vantage point and from the way that I answer this question, why would Matthew include all of those sketchy people and stories in the very beginning of this Christmas story? Because they're the point, right? Because they're the point of the Christmas story. This is why I believe Matthew included all of them, because they were the point of the story. They were the reason that Jesus had come, right? And so what we're going to do over the next few weeks is look at some of these stories. Now, Matthew knew, after having spent 3 years with Jesus and himself, if you know a little bit about Matthew, and we're going to look at his call here in a second, Matthew was someone that would have been left out of genealogies, okay? He would have been someone that would have been traditionally left out because he was not someone that anyone wanted to remind people about. And after 3 years with Jesus, Matthew realized that he had been part of something so much different. That Jesus stepped out of heaven and took on the form of a child born to a virgin to give his life for sketchy people like this. For sketchy people like you and for sketchy people like me. Now, if you remember our summer series, my voice is still cracking. I'm 45 years old, which is kind of weird. 44, actually. If you remember our summer series, do you remember this logo we did? Some of you are like, I ain't even been to church that long. We did this summer series called Face to Face with Jesus of Nazareth. And the very first message in that series, I recorded from my fishing boat. Do you remember that one? Where I'm talking to you on my fishing boat via video. In that series, and that very first week, we looked at those very first followers of Jesus. When Jesus was very first starting his ministry, and he goes to those fishermen, to Peter and his brothers, and James and John, these guys, and he says, come follow me, right? They have this huge fishing party. It's legit. He says, come follow me. They begin to follow him. They go into the city, and they're like, yes, we're part of Jesus' crew. This is awesome. And Jesus walks up to this man named Matthew, who's a tax collector, right? And he says to them, and I can just imagine Peter's face, like, Jesus he's talking to this tax collector. Why is he talking to this guy? Because the tax collectors were the worst of the worst of the worst, okay? Look at what happens here. This is continuing in the book of Matthew. This is the Matthew that we're reading. This is him recalling, and he's got the best recall of how all this happened. This is him recalling when Jesus called him, remembering when Jesus called him to follow him. Look at what it says here, Matthew chapter 9. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and he followed him. This is that same Matthew that's writing this gospel right now. And he was a tax collector. He was the lowest of the low on the social scale. And we talked a lot about this in that last series, so I'm just going to give you the just quick, brief notes. A tax collector's job was to collect tax, which is pretty simple, right? Collect tax from your countrymen. So he was Jewish, and he was hired by the Romans to collect a tax. Let's say the Romans said that everyone in a year has to pay $100 tax or whatever. So he would have to collect that from his countrymen. Well, what most tax collectors did is they would add a service charge. And you all pay service charges, okay? If any of you do Black Friday shopping this week, some of you did, right? Only one person. Okay, that's kind of interesting. And it was my wife. So anyway, we did. We bought a lot of stuff for Black Friday, but it wasn't gifts for people. It was stuff for our house. You know what I mean? Like Home Depot. Like, who are you buying? Nobody gets gifts at Home Depot. But anyway, they charge a tax, right? So Romans charge a tax, and that tax collector gets a little bit on the side. And they would be making money off their countrymen based on this. Let's just say in Yuma, I'm totally guessing, I may be wrong. Let's say there's 10,000 homes, okay? Let's just say there's 10,000 homes. And if Rome conquered Yuma, and Rome said, okay, for your household, your house owes us $300 a year for taxes, let's just say, okay? So at the end of the year, the Romans are going to get how much money? $3 million per year, okay, for the people of Yuma. Well, what the tax collector would do is let's say that each home owes $300 according to Roman taxes. He's going to add $100 for his own benefit, right? So now your tax is really $400 per year. Rome gets $3 million of that, and Matthew gets how much? $1 million of that. These guys were getting rich off their brothers and sisters, their countrymen, and everyone saw them as traitors. They were the lowest of the low. Like in your mind, I know we all know, like in our brain, it's a drug dealer, it's a murderer, it's a rapist, whatever it is, whoever the lowest of the low in your brain is, that's who these guys were. In fact, the Bible lumps them up continually, tax collectors and what? Do you remember? Sinners. And they get their own category of sinner. They're like a sinner, a really bad sinner, right? This is who the tax collectors are. And Matthew was one of them. The Bible differentiates. Look at continuing. So Jesus meets him. He calls him to follow him. And Matthew says, come on to my house, okay? Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and what? disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, the Pharisees are religious leaders. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" They were the scum of the earth. Now the reality is these are Matthew's only friends, because tax collectors are only able to hang out with other tax collectors and disreputable people. Okay? Just the reality is they were his only friends. And the Pharisees and religious leaders have beef with Jesus being there, because having been in this company to become ceremonially unclean, they're not even going to go in the place because they didn't want to risk that. So they're like calling to one of the disciples, "Hey, come here. Like, why is Jesus over there with those people?" And Jesus hears them, or he senses it, or he knows it, or whatever. And look, he responds to them. When Jesus heard this, he said, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do." Then he added, "Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I've come to call those, not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners." This was the point of Jesus' mission. He came to rescue the lost and heal the broken, right? This was the point. Now, if we can go back to that same question that I asked you a second ago, why would Matthew include all of these sketchy people at the very beginning of the Christmas story? I really believe the answer to that is because they were the point. They were the point. And through Matthew's personal experience with Jesus, taking notes all the time, right? Matthew was a tax collector. He had to have incredible records. You know that he was a note taker, just like some of you are, note takers. He would have taken all these notes of what Jesus had done and said and all of these things, and he's taking notes, and then he sits down years later to write about his experience with Jesus, and he's writing out this gospel, and he's realizing, thinking back to the idea that Jesus called me, a tax collector, to follow him. How can I not include Rahab, right? And Tamar and Ruth, because they were the point. Never in a million years would Matthew expect Jesus to call him to follow him. Never in a million years should that have happened. But Jesus changed everything when he came. And the whole point of the Christmas story is that Jesus came to earth to save sinners. This is the point of it. And so Matthew wanted to establish that right in the very beginning, that Jesus came to make things right between us and God. Okay? That was the point of the Christmas story. And all of us can relate to that. Okay? All of us can relate to that. So after 3 years with Jesus, Matthew knew that there was a radical shift in the way that people were being made right before God. And he saw that, and he experienced that. Worship team, you guys can come forward. He experienced that, and this was the point of Christmas. That yes, include those sketchy people. Include them. And in fact, add them. Because they were the point. That sinners come to God not based on their righteousness, but based on his. That this is the major change in the story, in history. This is the major change. So far, people are coming to God based on their righteousness, and Jesus says, no, it's not about your righteousness, it's about my righteousness. And I'm going to take care of that for you. And there was a radical shift in the cosmos when this baby was born. He came for sketchy people. He came for people like you and for me. And the reality is, if you think that you're not a sketchy person, I've got news for you. And the Bible has news for you, right? The Bible has news for you as well. So in this series, what we're going to do over the next few weeks is we're going to look at some of those sketchy people, some of those people in the parentheses. And maybe some of you have never even read these stories before, and you wonder, what does this have anything to do with Christmas? We're going to develop that. So I'm going to pray, the worship team's going to sing, and then at the end I'm going to come back up, so don't take off after they're done singing. I'm going to talk to you just really quickly about this series and our goals for this series as we close. If you're someone that feels like your relationship to God, your connection to God, is based on what you've done, meaning that you're someone that you just do, I grew up this way. My old school church, we used to have envelopes like this, right, that you'd fill out in Sunday school, and you would check the mark, Bible read daily, right? You would check the mark, Bible brought with you to church. You would check the mark, Monday night visitation. Y'all remember that one? You would check the mark, giving. You would check all these boxes, kind of like showing the church that you were being good, right? If you're someone that bases your connection to God based on what you've done, okay? The things that you've done, what I've done, that's what this sign says here, okay? If you're the type of person that's just, you're working hard at it, and you're coming to church and you're trying to do the right things, and you even give a little bit of money, and man, I served on that one day, work day at the church, and they cut down trees, and you're trying to get your way to heaven based on your acts of service, the things that you're doing here. If you feel like that in your brain there's a God in heaven that's just kind of weighing your scales, right? And you just got to outweigh the bad with the good. If you're basing your connection to God on what you've done, you're never going to get there. Additionally, there may be some of you that have this idea that you'll never be good enough for God, right? Like that you have this, like you don't know what's happened to me. You don't know how bad of a sinner I am. So you just kind of abandon the whole God thing because you know you're not good enough, and you're never going to be, because you come from a family, a long line of sinners, and just like, why would God love me? I can't make it on my own. You're right. Right? You're absolutely right. And in this series, what we want to challenge you with, especially, hear me, especially those of you that are like radically religious, what we want to challenge you with is that to abandon that philosophy completely and take on the concept and the philosophy and the actual biblical teaching that we come to God not based on what we've done, but based on what He did, okay? We come to God based on what He did for us. That the gospel message is about the fact that God took on flesh and gave us an example to live by, and that ultimately His life was taken, it was offered on our behalf, and He made it. This is why Matthew includes all these sketchy people, because this was such a radical change. Previous to this, men and women were made righteous before God based on what they had done, based on the rules that they kept and all those things. And Jesus came and radically changed history, saying that it's no longer based on your good deeds and these things and keeping the law. It's based on what Jesus did for you on the cross. This is the point of this series. Our challenge to you is that if this is you over here, you would abandon that completely, and that you would take hold of this concept here, that there is a God that loves you, who's given His life for you through His Son Jesus, who came and was born of a virgin, lived a life, a great life, a perfect life, but ultimately He gave that life for you and for me, because we're sketchy people and we're the point of the Christmas story. And this is why He came, and this is why we celebrate Christmas. Because we're made right with God, not based on our own good deeds or our giving or our telling people about Jesus or wearing the Christian t-shirts, but because of what He did for us. So that's my challenge to you. Why don't you pray with me, and then we're going to close.